The Galactic Academy of War stood on a world that had no name, only a number. The planet was cold and rocky, with winds that could strip flesh from bone if a person stayed outside too long. But the Academy's founders had chosen this place for a reason. They believed that warriors should train in hardship, not comfort. The main building was enormous, a structure of black stone and metal that stretched toward the gray sky like a clenched fist. Thousands of students from hundreds of species came here every year, hoping to become the greatest fighters in the known galaxy. Most of them failed. The Academy only accepted the best, and even among the best, only a small number ever graduated. Instructor walked through the halls of the training wing, his heavy boots making dull sounds against the stone floor. He was of a species known for their size and their love of combat. His skin was covered in scales the color of old copper, and he had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. 2 large ones in the middle for normal vision, and 2 smaller ones above and below for detecting movement and heat. He had been teaching at the Academy for 32 years. In that time, he had seen students from every corner of the galaxy. He had trained soldiers who could punch through walls, mystics who could bend light into weapons, and berserkers whose rage made them nearly impossible to kill. He thought he had seen everything. Today, he was about to learn that he was wrong. The first-year students were waiting for him in Training Hall 7. There were 41 of them this year, a larger class than usual. They stood in neat rows, wearing the simple gray uniforms that all initiates wore. Their faces showed a mix of excitement and fear, which was normal. The first practical examination always made students nervous. Stopped at the front of the hall and looked at them with all 4 of his eyes. He recognized most of the species represented. There were 12, their bodies covered in natural armor that looked like overlapping plates of gray stone. There were 8 slender beings with skin that seemed to glow faintly from within. There were 6 massive creatures with 4 arms and heads that looked like they had been carved from rough rock. And then there were the others, a few small and quick, some with their extra joints and flexible spines. A pair of twins, their minds linked in ways that other species could not understand. And one human. Size found her near the back of the group. Her name was Emma Collins, and she was 18 years old by her species counting. She was small compared to most of the other students, with brown hair that she had tied back and eyes the color of Earth's forests. Her file said she came from a place called Nebraska, which was apparently a farming region on humanities. The instructor did not know much about humans. They were newcomers to the galactic stage, having made first contact only 51 years ago. Before that, they had been alone on their single planet, unaware that the universe was full of life. They were primitive by most standards, a species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. The fact that this girl had been admitted to the Academy was unusual. Had asked the admissions council about her. They had told him that her test scores were exceptional, particularly in areas related to survival and adaptability. But test scores did not make a warrior. The practical examinations would reveal whether she truly belonged here. He cleared his throat, a sound like rocks grinding together, and the students immediately fell silent. "Today is your first practical examination," he announced. His voice was deep and rough, filling the hall without effort. "You will be tested on one of the most fundamental skills a warrior can possess, the creation of a personal weapon." He gestured toward the eastern wall, where a massive door began to slide open. Beyond it was a chamber that made several students gasp. It was the material hall, a room the size of a small stadium, filled with every substance a weapon maker could desire. There were blocks of the strongest metal known to the galaxy, stacked in neat piles near the entrance. There were bars of quantum steel, which could hold an edge sharp enough to cut through starship hulls. There were crystals from the mining worlds of the outer reach, each one containing enough energy to power a plasma blade for 1,000 years. On raised platforms throughout the room sat more exotic materials. Synthetic polymers that could absorb and redirect kinetic force. Living metals that could repair themselves when damaged. Phase-shift alloys that existed partially in another dimension, making them nearly impossible to block with conventional defenses. And at the far end, behind protective barriers, were the energy cores. Small spheres of contained power that could transform a simple blade into a weapon capable of cutting through anything. "You have 8 hours," continued. "You may use any material in this room. You may use any tool in the forging stations along the walls. The only rule is that you must work alone. No help from other students, no help from instructors." He began to pace slowly in front of them, his 4 eyes moving constantly, watching their reactions. "Your weapon will be judged on 3 things. First, lethality. Can it kill? A weapon that cannot harm an enemy is not a weapon at all. Second, durability. Will it last? A blade that breaks in your first battle is worse than no blade at all. Third, craftsmanship. Is it well made? A warrior's weapon is an extension of their soul. It should reflect skill and care." He stopped packing and faced them directly. "The best weapon in this examination will earn its creator a place in the advanced combat track. The worst will result in immediate expulsion from the academy." A ripple of tension passed through the students. Several of the younger ones looked frightened. One of the students actually took a step backward before catching himself. Allowed himself a small smile. Fear was useful. It reminded students that this was not a game. "You may begin." The students immediately began moving toward the material hall. They went straight for their heavy footsteps shaking the floor. They drifted toward the energy cores, their glowing hands already reaching out to sense the power within. They spread out, grabbing anything that looked heavy enough to cause serious damage. Emma Collins did not move. Watched her with his smaller eyes while pretending to observe the other students. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, staring at the floor in front of her. Her expression was difficult to read, which was unusual for humans. In his experience, they tended to show their emotions openly, unable to control their faces the way more disciplined species could. After a full minute, she still had not moved. The other students had already begun selecting their materials, filling their arms with metals and crystals and energy cores. Some were already at the forging stations, heating their first pieces. Walked over to her. "Human," he said, "the examination has begun." She looked up at him. There was no fear in her eyes, which surprised him. Most first-year students were terrified of him. He was twice her height and probably 10 times her weight. His species had been warriors for 20,000 years. "I know," she said. Her voice was calm, almost thoughtful. "I'm thinking." "Thinking about what?" "About what I need." Tilted his massive head. "The materials are right there. What more could you need to think about?" Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Instructor, you said we could use any material in this room. Is that exactly true?" "The material hall contains everything a weapon maker could require." "But is it limited to the material hall? What if I wanted something that isn't in there?" Frowned. In 32 years, no student had ever asked such a question. "What did you have in mind?" "Bone." The word hung in the air between them. Blinked all 4 of his eyes, certain he had misheard. "Bone," he repeated. "Yes, animal bone, or something similar, organic material with a crystalline structure." A student named had stopped nearby, listening. He let out a booming laugh that echoed through the hall. "The little human wants to play with dead animal parts," he said, his 4 arms spreading wide in amusement. "Maybe she should go back to her primitive planet and leave real weapon making to real warriors." Several other students laughed as well. They seemed especially entertained, their armor plates clicking together as their bodies shook. Emma did not react to the mockery. She kept her eyes on, waiting for his answer. The instructor considered for a long moment. It was a strange request, certainly. No student in the history of the academy had ever asked for bone. The material hall contained substances that could cut through starships, that could block plasma fire, that could kill with a touch. Why would anyone choose bone when they had access to such wonders? But the rules of the examination were clear. Students could request any material they needed. The academy prided itself on providing whatever was necessary. "I will have it sent to your workstation," said finally. "What size do you require?" "Something large, 1/2 meter or more if possible, dense from a weight-bearing bone. Leg or hip would be ideal." "A species?" It doesn't matter, whatever is available. Made a note on his personal tablet. Very well, it will be there shortly. Emma nodded her thanks and walked toward the workstations at the back of the hall, passing the material hall without even glancing inside. The other students watched her go with expressions ranging from confusion to contempt. Shook his massive head. Pathetic, he muttered. Humans should have stayed in their own system where they belong. Said nothing, but as he watched the human girl walk away, he felt something he had not felt in many years. Curiosity. Emma's workstation was at the far end of the hall, away from the others. This was not by accident. When she had arrived at the academy 3 weeks ago, she had quickly learned that most species did not think highly of humans. They saw her people as newcomers, primitives, children who had stumbled into a universe they did not understand. She had also learned that arguing with them was pointless. So instead, she kept to herself, did her work, and waited for the chance to prove them wrong. The bone arrived 20 minutes later, delivered by a service drone. It was exactly what she had requested, a thick femur from some large animal, probably a draft beast used for farming on one of the agricultural worlds. The material was dense and heavy, with a smooth outer surface and a slightly porous interior. Perfect. Emma sat down at her workstation and examined the bone carefully. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its weight, testing its balance. She tapped it in several places, listening to the sound it made. She scraped her fingernail across the surface, checking the hardness of the outer layer. While she worked, she was aware of the other students watching her. She could hear their whispered comments, their laughter, their scorn. She ignored all of it. She had a job to do. From the small bag she had brought with her, she removed several items. A rough stone with a coarse surface, a finer stone with a smoother grain, a piece of leather, a small container of water. That was all. A student named walked past on her way to one of the forging stations. She stopped when she saw what Emma was doing. "Those are your tools?" she asked, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. "Stones and leather." "Yes." The forging stations have plasma cutters, molecular reshaping fields, quantum-level precision instruments, and you're going to use rocks. Emma looked up at her. "These are what I know how to use." Stared at her for a moment, her luminous eyes unreadable. Then she shook her head and walked away, muttering something in her own language. Emma returned to her work. The first step was to remove the outer layer of the bone. This part was made of compact tissue, dense and hard, but not what she needed for a blade. She picked up the rough stone and began to scrape, long, slow strokes that gradually wore away the material. It was tedious work, the kind that most people would find unbearable. But Emma had grown up on a farm in Nebraska, a place where the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the nearest real city was 100 miles beyond that. She had learned patience early, learned that some things could not be rushed no matter how much you wanted them done. Her grandmother had taught her this skill when she was 9 years old. The old woman had been a historian before she retired, specializing in ancient human cultures. She had spent decades studying how people lived before technology, before metals, before everything that modern humans took for granted. "Before we had machines," Grandmother Collins had said, sitting on the porch of the farmhouse on a summer evening. "We had our hands, and before we had steel, we had bone and stone. Our ancestors survived ice ages with nothing but sharpened sticks and their own cleverness. Never forget that." Emma had not forgotten. Every summer after that, her grandmother had taught her the old skills: how to identify good stone for knapping, how to prepare bone for tool making, how to create fire without matches, how to find water in dry land, how to track animals, how to survive. At the time, Emma had thought it was just an interesting hobby, a way to connect with the past. She never imagined she would actually use these skills for anything important. Now, sitting in an alien academy on a world without a name, she understood why her grandmother had insisted on teaching her. The outer layer of bone came away slowly, revealing the denser material beneath. Emma worked steadily, not rushing, not resting. The other students had already been at their forges for over an hour, but she was not concerned about time. She knew exactly how long this would take. Made his rounds through the hall, checking on each student's progress. Most of them were doing well. They were producing traditional war blades, heavy curved swords designed to be used with their species' enormous strength. They were weaving intricate patterns of energy, creating weapons that existed partially as matter and partially as pure light. They were building brutal, crushing weapons, maces and hammers that could shatter stone. When the instructor reached Emma's station, he stopped and observed her work in silence. She had removed most of the outer bone layer now and was beginning to shape the denser material beneath. Her movements were slow and precise, each stroke of the stone deliberate and controlled. "You have done this before," said. It was not a question, but Emma answered anyway. "Many times, my grandmother taught me." "Your grandmother was a weapon maker." "No, she was a teacher. She studied how humans lived before we had technology, before we had cities or farms or anything like that." Was silent for a moment. Then he asked, "How did humans live before technology?" Emma continued her work as she spoke. "We were hunters. For most of our history, we survived by chasing animals and gathering plants. We lived in small groups, moving from place to place, following the food. With no weapons." "Oh, we had weapons, just not metal ones. We used what we could find. Stone, bone, wood. We shaped them with our hands and our patience." The instructor looked at the bone in her hands. It was beginning to take shape now, a rough blade form emerging from the raw material. "And these weapons were effective." Emma glanced up at him. "Our ancestors killed animals 10 times their size with sharpened sticks. We hunted mammoths to extinction. We spread across our entire planet to every climate, every environment. Deserts, forests, mountains, ice. We survived them all with nothing but bone and stone." She returned to her work. "So yes, these weapons were effective." Watched her for a while longer. Then he moved on to the next station, his expression thoughtful. By the 4th hour, the difference between Emma and the other students had become stark. Most of them had completed the rough shaping of their weapons and were now working on the finer details. Their forges glowed with heat, their tools hummed with power, and their workstations were covered with sophisticated measuring instruments and precision equipment. Emma's workstation had a bone, some rocks, a piece of leather, and a container of water. That was all. But the bone was changing. What had started as a thick, rough femur was now a blade, slender and curved, with a single edge that followed the natural grain of the material. The point was sharp, almost needle-like. The base had been shaped into a simple handle, wrapped with the leather for grip. Emma switched from the rough stone to the finer one. This was the most delicate part of the process, the part that would determine whether the blade was merely sharp or truly deadly. She worked with extreme care, each stroke adding to the edge, slowly building it up one layer at a time. A group of students had gathered nearby, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Among them was Sen, the eldest son of a prominent military family. He had been raised from birth to be a warrior, trained in combat techniques that dated back thousands of years. His own weapon, a massive curved sword, was already complete and hanging from his belt. "I don't understand," he said to the beside him. "Why would anyone choose bone when they could have metal?" Snorted, "Because she's a primitive. Her species has only been in space for 50 years. They probably still think fire is impressive." "But she was admitted to the academy. Her scores must have been good." "Political gesture," another student said, a named Malik. "The council wants to show that they're welcoming to all species, even the backwards ones. They probably lowered the standards just for her." Emma heard every word they said. She did not respond. She kept working. The edge of the blade was taking shape now, thin enough to be almost translucent at the very tip. Bone could be sharpened to an edge that rivaled steel if you knew what you were doing. The trick was to work with the material's structure, not against it. Bone was not like metal. It was not uniform or predictable. It was a living thing, or at least it had been once. It had grown inside a creature, responding to stress and pressure, adapting to the needs of the body that contained it. This gave it properties that metal could not match. Emma had learned to read bone the way some people read books. She could feel its structure through her fingertips, sense where it was strong and where it was weak. She knew which parts would hold an edge and which parts would chip or crack. Her grandmother had called this skill listening to the material. Emma thought that was a good way to describe it. By the 6th hour, her blade was nearly complete. All that remained was the final polishing, the last step that would transform a sharp tool into a true weapon. She dipped the leather in water and began to rub it along the edge, using the moisture and friction to smooth away the tiny imperfections left by the stones. This process would take at least another hour, maybe more. But when it was done, the edge would be smoother than glass. Returned to her station and watched her work in silence. After several minutes, he spoke. "May I examine it?" Emma handed him the blade without hesitation. The instructor held it up to the light. The bone was almost white now, polished to a soft shine. The blade was perhaps 35 centimeters long, slightly curved, with a single edge that ran from base to tip. It looked simple, almost primitive, compared to the gleaming metal weapons the other students had created. But when touched the edge with one of his smaller eyes, a drop of blood appeared immediately. He had barely felt the contact. "Sharp," he said, examining his eye in surprise. Skin was tough enough to turn aside most blades. "It will be sharper when I'm finished," Emma said. Turned the blade over, examining its structure. "How is it so hard? Bone should be more brittle than this." The outer layer of bone is mostly mineral, calcium phosphate mostly, but underneath that is collagen, which is more flexible. When you remove the outer layer and expose the mineral-rich interior, then polish it properly, you get something that's harder than most steel. The trick is keeping it from becoming too brittle. She pointed to a slight curve in the blade. "See that? I built in a little flexibility. If something strikes the blade, it will bend slightly instead of breaking. It's not perfect, but it's better than a straight edge that would shatter." Looked at her with new interest. "You understand material science." "I understand bone," Emma corrected. "I've been working with it since I was 9 years old." The instructor returned the blade. "Continue. I am curious to see the final result." Emma went back to her polishing. The 8th hour arrived and called for the students to stop working. Those who had not completed their weapons were allowed to present what they had, though their grades would reflect the incomplete state. The evaluation process began. Each student stepped forward in turn, presenting their weapon for inspection. Examined each one carefully, testing its edge, its weight, its balance. He struck practice targets with them, testing their cutting power. He applied measured pressure to them, testing their durability. He looked at every detail of their construction, evaluating their craftsmanship. Most of the weapons were excellent. They had produced powerful war blades that could cleave through armor. They had created elegant energy weapons that hummed with contained power. They had built brutal hammers and maces that could shatter stone. His weapon was particularly impressive, a four-headed flail that seemed to weigh more than Emma herself. When he struck the practice target with it, the target exploded into fragments. Sen's sword earned high marks as well. Its edge was razor-sharp, its balance perfect, its construction flawless. Noted that it was one of the finest student blades he had seen in years. Then it was Emma's turn. She walked to the front of the hall, carrying her bone blade in both hands. The other students watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open contempt. A few of them were already whispering to each other, laughing quietly. Took the blade and held it up for everyone to see. "This is Emma Collins's weapon," he announced. "A blade made from animal bone, shaped with stones, polished with leather and water." More whispers, more laughter. Did not even bother to hide his amusement, his massive body shaking with mirth. Ignored them all. He walked to the testing area where a series of targets waited. The first target was a block of synthetic material designed to simulate organic tissue. It was the same material used to train medical students, with the same density and resistance as living flesh. Slashed the blade across the target in a single smooth motion. The block fell apart in 2 pieces. The laughter stopped. Moved to the second target, a plate of standard military armor. This was the kind of protection worn by soldiers across the galaxy, designed to stop projectiles and energy weapons alike. He drove the point of the bone blade into the armor plate. It punched through like the armor was made of paper. Now there was complete silence in the hall. Moved to the durability testing machine. He placed the blade in the apparatus and began to increase the pressure. The numbers on the display climbed steadily. 100 units, 200, 300. The machine reached 500 units of pressure before it stopped automatically. This was the maximum the device was designed to apply. The blade was undamaged. Removed it from the machine and examined it closely. The edge was still perfect. The structure showed no signs of stress or fracture. He walked back to the center of the hall and faced the students. "Let me explain what you have just witnessed," he said, his voice low and serious. "This blade, made from nothing but bone and shaped with nothing but stone, has outperformed 60% of your weapons in cutting tests. It has matched or exceeded 40% of your weapons in durability tests. Its edge is sharper than most of the metal blades in this room." He held up the blade. Emma Collins had access to quantum steel. She had access to energy cores and living metals and phase shift alloys. She chose to use none of them. Instead, she asked for a bone, and with that bone and a few rocks, she created this. Stepped forward, his massive face twisted in confusion. "That's impossible. Bone cannot be harder than, it's just dead animal matter." "It is not harder than," agreed. "But hardness is not the only measure of a weapon's effectiveness. This blade is sharp because Emma Collins understands how to work with the material's structure rather than against it. It is durable because she built flexibility into the design, allowing it to absorb force rather than resist it. It is lethal because she has spent years learning how to shape bone into weapons." He turned to face Emma, who was standing quietly at the side of the hall. "Tell me," he said, "how long have you been practicing this skill?" "About 9 years," Emma replied. "My grandmother started teaching me when I was 9. I've made hundreds of bone tools and dozens of weapons." "And why did you choose to use this skill today, instead of the advanced materials we offered?" Emma considered the question for a moment. Then she said, "Because bone is what I know. I've never worked with before. I've never used a plasma forge or a molecular shaper. If I tried to use those things, I would be learning on the job and I would make mistakes." She gestured at her blade. "But I know bone. I know exactly what it can do and what it can't do. I know its strengths and its weaknesses. I know how to make it do what I want." She paused. "Also, bone doesn't need anything else. No power source, no maintenance, no special equipment. If I were stranded on a strange world with nothing but the clothes on my back, I could make this blade. I couldn't say the same for an energy sword." Nodded slowly. Practical thinking, the mark of a survivor. He turned back to the class. "Many of you believe that technology makes a warrior. You think that having the best materials, the best tools, the best equipment is what separates the strong from the weak. You are wrong." He began to pace in front of them, his 4 eyes moving constantly. "Technology is a tool, nothing more. It can help a warrior fight, but it cannot make someone into a warrior. What makes a warrior is knowledge, skill, adaptability. The ability to take whatever is available and turn it into an advantage." He stopped packing and fixed his gaze on them. "Humanity has been in space for 51 years. In that time, they have spread to 37 worlds. They have established trade relationships with over 100 species. They have survived first contact with the collective, which has destroyed civilizations far older than theirs." Several students shifted uncomfortably. They were not spoken of lightly. They were a species that viewed all other life as either prey or obstacles. "Do you know how humanity survived the?" asked. "They did not have better weapons. They did not have superior technology. They outclassed them in every measurable way." He paused. "Humanity survived because they refused to die. When their ships were destroyed, they fought from the wreckage. When their weapons ran out of power, they made new ones from debris. When they were cornered with no way out, they found ways out that no one had ever thought of before." He held up Emma's blade one more time. "This blade represents everything that makes humanity dangerous. Not their technology, not their strength. Their refusal to accept limitations. Their ability to take nothing and make something from it. Their absolute, unwavering determination to survive no matter what. He handed the blade back to Emma. Final scores: Emma Collins, 92 out of 100. She loses points for durability, as bone will eventually degrade faster than metal, but in every other category her weapon exceeds requirements. A murmur ran through the students. 92 was one of the highest scores in the class. Sen, 94 out of 100. His blade is excellent work, among the finest I have seen from a first-year student. He inclined his head in acknowledgement, but his eyes were on Emma. His expression was difficult to read. Continued announcing scores. Most of the students did well. A few did poorly and would face academic review. Scored 88, good but not exceptional. His weapon was powerful but crude, showing more brute force than actual skill. When the announcements were complete, dismissed the class. The students began to file out, talking among themselves. Many of them were still discussing Emma's performance, their voices a mix of surprise, admiration, and resentment. Sen approached Emma as she was packing up her workstation. "Human," he said. Emma looked up at him. He was enormous, nearly twice her height and probably 5 times her weight. His armor plates glinted in the hall's lights. "Yes. I underestimated you. I thought you were here because of politics, not ability. I was wrong." Emma studied his face. We're not known for admitting mistakes. This was probably difficult for him. "Thank you," she said simply. Sen nodded. "I look forward to training with you. I think I could learn from your approach." He walked away without waiting for a response. Emma watched him go, surprised. That was not what she had expected. Approached next, but his expression was very different from this. "Don't think this changes anything, human," he growled. "A clever trick with some dead bones doesn't make you a warrior. When we face each other in combat training, I will show you what real strength looks like." Emma met his eyes without flinching. "I look forward to it." The snorted and walked away, his forearms swinging with barely contained aggression. Had observed both exchanges from across the hall. He made a mental note to watch Emma Collins closely in the coming months. She had handled both situations perfectly, accepting the compliment graciously and refusing to be intimidated by the threat. She was going to be an interesting student. The months that followed were difficult for Emma. Combat training at the academy was brutal, designed to push students to their absolute limits. Classes ran from dawn until well after dark, covering everything from hand-to-hand fighting to small unit tactics to the operation of military spacecraft. Emma struggled with the physical aspects. She was smaller and weaker than most of her classmates, unable to match the raw power of the or the speed of the. In sparring matches, she was often defeated quickly, unable to withstand the force of her opponent's attacks. But she never stopped getting up. That was the thing that the other students began to notice about her. No matter how many times she was knocked down, she always rose again. No matter how badly she was beaten, she always came back the next day, ready to try again. And slowly, gradually, she began to improve. She could not match the strength of the, so she learned to redirect their force, using their own power against them. She could not match the speed of the, so she learned to anticipate their movements, positioning herself where they were going to be rather than where they were. She could not match the ferocity of the, so she learned to be patient, waiting for them to exhaust themselves before striking. Her bone blade became famous among the first-year students. She carried it everywhere, a constant reminder of her unconventional approach. Some students mocked her for it. Others began to ask questions about how it was made. Emma answered their questions openly. She showed them how to identify good bone for shaping. She explained the techniques for knapping and polishing. She demonstrated the proper way to apply an edge. Some students were surprised that she was willing to share her knowledge. They had expected her to guard her secrets jealously, as most warriors did. "Why would I hide it?" Emma asked when one student questioned her about this. "The technique isn't mine. It belongs to my species, to my ancestors. They developed it over thousands of years, passing it down from generation to generation. I'm just the latest person to learn it." She shrugged. "Besides, knowing how to make a bone blade doesn't automatically mean you can make one. It takes practice, years of practice. By the time you've mastered it, you won't be trying to steal my techniques. You'll have developed your own." This attitude earned her respect from some students and confusion from others. The competitive nature of the academy did not encourage sharing. Students were expected to develop their own advantages and guard them carefully. Emma's willingness to teach was seen by some as weakness, by others as confidence. She did not seem to care what anyone thought. 6 months into the first year, the academy held its first tournament of skills. This was a competition that tested students in multiple areas: combat, strategy, survival, and weapon making. It was a chance for students to demonstrate their overall capabilities and for instructors to identify future leaders. Emma was not expected to do well. Her combat scores were average at best, and she had struggled with some of the strategic exercises, but she had surprised people before. The tournament began with the survival challenge. Students were dropped onto a wild continent on the academy world, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a single tool of their choosing. They had 3 days to reach a pickup point 200 kilometers away, through terrain that included dense forests, steep mountains, and a river that was known for its dangerous wildlife. Emma chose to bring a stone knife. Not her bone blade, which she valued too much to risk losing, but a simple cutting tool she had made herself. The other students brought various items: energy torches, navigation devices, portable shelters. One brought a powered exoskeleton that could carry him faster than he could run. The drop ships released them at dawn. By noon, the first students had already been eliminated, victims of the hostile wildlife or the treacherous terrain. By evening, a third of the competitors were out. Emma moved steadily through the forest, not rushing but never stopping. She found water easily, recognizing the signs that her grandmother had taught her. She avoided the more dangerous animals by reading their territorial markers and staying out of their paths. She made camp at night in defensible positions, sleeping lightly with her stone knife in her hand. On the second day, she encountered Sen that had been doing well, using his species' natural armor and strength to push through obstacles that would have stopped other students. But he had made a mistake, drinking from a stream that was contaminated with a parasitic organism common to the area. When Emma found him, he was lying beside the trail, barely conscious. His body was fighting the infection, but the battle was draining his strength. Without treatment, he would not be able to continue. Emma could have walked past him. The tournament rules did not require students to help each other, and helping a competitor would slow her down. Some students would have seen this as an opportunity to eliminate a rival. Instead, she stopped. "Sen," she said, kneeling beside him, "can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly. "Human," he managed, "the water." "I know, I saw the contamination signs upstream. Don't worry, I know what to do." She built a fire and boiled water, then used it to make a tea from certain plants she had identified earlier. This was an old remedy, something her grandmother had learned from indigenous peoples in South America. It would not cure the infection, but it would help his body fight it. She stayed with him through the night, keeping the fire going, monitoring his condition. By morning, the worst of the infection had passed. He was weak but able to walk. "You should have left me," he said as they prepared to continue. "Why?" "The tournament, helping me cost you time. You might not make the pickup point now." Emma shrugged. "Maybe, but I wasn't going to let you die over a competition." They traveled together for the rest of the day, moving slower than Emma would have alone, but fast enough to make reasonable progress. Sen was still recovering, unable to move at his full speed. Emma adjusted her pace to match his. They reached the pickup point with 3 hours to spare. They were not the first to arrive. That honor went to a who had somehow managed to glide most of the distance using her energy manipulation abilities, but they were well within the acceptable time. More importantly, word spread quickly about what Emma had done. She had sacrificed her own chances to help a rival, a rival who had previously been among those who doubted her. The other challenges followed over the next week. Combat rounds, strategic exercises, weapon-making competitions. Emma did reasonably well in most of them, though she rarely placed at the top. Her combat skills were still developing, and some of the strategic exercises required knowledge of galactic politics that she did not yet possess. But in the weapon-making challenge, she excelled. This time, the task was different from the first-year examination. Students were not given access to the material hall. Instead, they were given a collection of random items, salvage from a destroyed spacecraft, and told to create a functional weapon from whatever they could find. Most students struggled with this challenge. They were accustomed to working with proper materials and proper tools. The salvage included twisted metal, shattered composites, damaged electronics, and various pieces of debris that had no obvious use. Emma looked at the pile of salvage and smiled. She had grown up on a farm where nothing was ever thrown away. If something broke, you fixed it. If it could not be fixed, you used its parts for something else. She had learned to see potential in objects that others considered worthless. Within the first hour, she had identified several promising components. A piece of dense alloy that could serve as a blade, a length of composite material that would make a good handle, some wire that could be used for binding. But she also found something else. A bone. Not an animal bone, but a structural element from the ship, made from a bone-like composite that was sometimes used in spacecraft construction for its combination of strength and lightness. She got to work. The blade she created was unlike anything the judges had seen before. It combined metal and bone composite in a layered structure that gave it both hardness and flexibility. The edge was created using traditional knapping techniques, modified to work with the spacecraft materials. The handle was wrapped with wire and padding from one of the ship's seats, providing a secure grip. When she presented it to the judges, they examined it with obvious fascination. "Explain your construction method," one of them requested. Emma walked them through each step, describing how she had assessed the materials, planned the design, and executed the construction. She explained why she had chosen to combine different materials instead of using just one, and how she had adapted her bone-working techniques to work with the synthetic composite. "This is remarkable," the chief judge said finally. "You have taken random debris and created a weapon that is not only functional but genuinely elegant. The combination of traditional techniques with modern materials is innovative." Emma scored first place in the weapon-making challenge. Combined with her decent performances in the other areas, she finished in the top 15 overall, a result that surprised many people who had expected her to be eliminated early. But more importantly, her performance had earned her something that could not be measured in points: respect. Students who had previously ignored her began to acknowledge her presence. Some asked her questions about her techniques. Others simply nodded when they passed her in the halls, a small gesture of recognition among warriors. Not everyone was pleased with her success. In particular, seemed angered by it. The had always been near the top of his class in raw combat ability, but his overall performance in the tournament had been disappointing. He had placed in the middle of the pack, his brute force approach failing him in challenges that required subtlety or creativity. He confronted Emma outside the training halls one evening, blocking her path with his massive body. "You think you're clever, human?" he growled. "Playing with bones and scraps, making the instructors think you're special." Emma looked up at him calmly. "I think I'm a student, same as you. I'm learning the same lessons, taking the same tests, following the same rules." "You don't belong here. Humans don't have what it takes to be real warriors. You're soft, weak, pathetic. The only reason you've survived this long is because you hide behind tricks and luck." "Is that what you think?" "It's what I know, and I'm going to prove it." He leaned closer, his breath hot on her face. "In the combat finals next month, I'm going to request you as my opponent, and when we face each other in the ring, I'm going to show everyone what humans really are." Emma did not back away. "If that's what you want, I'll be there." Laughed, a harsh sound like rocks being crushed. "You don't even have the sense to be scared. That's going to make breaking you even more satisfying." He walked away, leaving Emma alone in the hallway. She stood there for a long moment, thinking. Then she went to the training rooms and began to practice. The combat finals were the most anticipated event of the first year. Students faced each other in one-on-one matches, testing everything they had learned against opponents who had trained just as hard. The matches were not to the death, but serious injuries were common. The Academy's medical facilities were always busy after the finals. True to his word, requested Emma as his first-round opponent. The request was unusual, since students typically faced opponents of similar skill level in the early rounds, but the instructors allowed it. They were curious to see what would happen. The match was scheduled for the third day of the finals. Emma spent the time between preparing, analyzing everything she knew about fighting styles and specific tendencies. She watched recordings of his previous matches, studied his movements, identified his patterns. He was powerful, that was obvious. His forearms gave him an overwhelming advantage in close combat, able to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. His body was naturally armored, with thick plates of bone-like material covering his vital areas. His rage gave him the ability to ignore pain, to keep fighting through injuries that would stop other beings. But he was also predictable. He relied on his strength, using the same combinations of attacks over and over again. He expected his opponents to back away from his assault, to try to create distance. He was not prepared for someone who came toward him. Emma had watched humans fight before. The recordings were rare, since humans had not been part of the galactic community for long, but a few existed from the early contact period. Most of them ended badly for the humans. But not all of them. The successful fights shared common elements. The humans did not try to match strength with strength, which was suicide against a. Instead, they used speed and precision, targeting the few vulnerable areas on the body. And they stayed close, inside the reach of those forearms, where this power was harder to apply. It was a dangerous strategy. One mistake would be fatal, but it was the only strategy that had any chance of working. The day of the match arrived. The combat arena was packed with students and instructors, all eager to see the human face the betting pools, though officially prohibited, heavily favored. Few people gave Emma any real chance. She walked into the arena carrying her bone blade. Was already there, his massive body seeming to fill half the ring. He held a heavy war hammer in one hand and a spiked shield in another, with his remaining two arms free for grappling. "Last chance to surrender, human," he called out. "I'll try to leave you alive if you beg." Emma did not respond. She simply raised her blade and waited. The signal sounded. Charged immediately, exactly as Emma had expected. His hammer came down in a devastating overhead strike that would have crushed her skull if it had connected. But Emma was not there. She had moved the instant he began his charge, sliding to the side and then forward, coming inside his reach before he could adjust. Her blade flicked out, scoring a shallow cut along his arm. "First blood," roared and swung his shield, trying to knock her away. Emma ducked under it and struck again, this time at his leg. Another shallow cut, not deep enough to cripple but enough to sting. The spun, all four arms sweeping in a circle around him. Emma was forced to leap backward, barely avoiding the attack. But she did not retreat far. As soon as the arms passed, she was moving forward again. This was the rhythm of the fight. Attacking with overwhelming power, Emma evading and counterattacking with precise strikes. Neither of them could land a decisive blow, but Emma was accumulating damage while the was growing increasingly frustrated. "Stand still and fight," bellowed. "No," Emma said and struck again. The match continued for nearly 20 minutes, an eternity in combat terms. Both fighters were exhausted, though they showed it in different ways. His movements were becoming sluggish, his wounds leaking blood. Emma was breathing hard, her muscles burning from the constant movement. Finally made a mistake. He to a hammer strike, putting too much of his weight behind it. When Emma evaded, he stumbled forward off balance for just a moment. That moment was all she needed. She struck 3 times in rapid succession, once to the nerve cluster behind his knee, causing his leg to buckle. once to the pressure point under his arm, numbing his grip, and once to the base of his skull, a careful blow with the flat of her blade that triggered unconsciousness. Collapsed. For a long moment, there was absolute silence in the arena. Then the crowd erupted. Emma stood over her fallen opponent, breathing hard. Her bone blade was slick with his blood, though none of the wounds she had inflicted were serious. She had been careful about that. She wanted to beat him, not kill him. The medical team rushed in to tend to. Emma walked out of the arena without looking back. Was waiting for her outside. "Impressive," he said. "You studied his fighting style carefully." "I had to. I couldn't beat him with strength. I had to beat him with knowledge." The instructor nodded. "That is the human way. We have observed it many times in many different contexts. When humans cannot win by conventional means, they find unconventional ones. They adapt. They overcome." He paused. "Some species see this as weakness, an admission that you cannot compete directly. They are wrong. It is your greatest strength, the ability to recognize your limitations and work around them." Emma looked down at her blade, still wet with blood. "My grandmother used to say something similar. She said that humans didn't survive because we were the strongest or the fastest. We survived because we were the most stubborn. We refused to accept that anything was impossible." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Emma's voice carried a note of sadness. "She died 2 years ago. She never got to see me come here." Was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think she would be proud of what you accomplished today." Emma looked up at him and smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. "I hope so." The combat finals continued for another week. Emma won 2 more matches before being eliminated in the quarterfinals by Sen. The combination of skill and natural armor proved too much for her, though she pushed him to his limits before falling. She finished the finals in 8th place overall, the highest placement any human had ever achieved at the Academy. But more importantly, she had proven something, not just to the other students, not just to the instructors, but to herself. She belonged here. She could compete with species that had been warriors for thousands of years. And she had done it with bone and stone and the knowledge of her ancestors. On the last day of the year, assembled the first-year students for a final address. "You have all grown considerably since you arrived," he told them. "Some of you have discovered strengths you did not know you possessed. Others have learned to overcome weaknesses that once seemed insurmountable. All of you have earned the right to continue to the second year." He paused, his 4 eyes sweeping across the assembled students. "I want to speak about something that happened at the beginning of this year. On your first day, I gave you an examination, create a personal weapon. Most of you used the advanced materials we provided. One of you did not." His eyes found Emma in the crowd. Emma Collins asked for a bone. She shaped it with stones, polished it with leather, and created a blade that outperformed most of your high-technology weapons. At the time, many of you thought she was foolish. Some of you mocked her. He let that hang in the air for a moment. "Now, after a year of training together, I want you to think about what her choice represented. She did not use bone because she was too primitive to use. She used bone because she knew bone. She understood its properties, its strengths, its limitations. She had spent years mastering its use." He began to pace slowly in front of them. "That is what makes a warrior, not the weapon in your hand, not the armor on your body, the knowledge in your mind, the skill in your hands, the will in your heart." He stopped packing. Emma Collins came to this academy as an outsider, a human, a member of a species that has only been part of the galactic community for half a century. Many of you expected her to fail. Many of you believed that humans were too weak, too primitive, too inexperienced to compete with species that have been warriors for. His voice hardened. "You were wronged. Humans are not dangerous because of their technology. They are not dangerous because of their physical capabilities. They are dangerous because they refuse to accept limitations. They take whatever is available and find a way to make it work. They face impossible odds and find ways to overcome them." He turned to face Emma directly. "That girl sharpened a piece of bone, And with that bone, she scored higher than students using the finest materials in the galaxy. That is the human spirit. That is what you should all aspire to. He turned back to the class. Dismissed, I will see you all next year. The students filed out, talking among themselves. Many of them glanced at Emma as they passed, their expressions a mix of respect and thoughtfulness. Sen stopped beside her. He was right, you know. I have learned more from watching you than from any instructor. The way you approach problems, the way you refuse to give up, it is different from how my people think. Different isn't bad, Emma said. No, it isn't, he paused. I am glad you came to this academy, Emma Collins. I believe you will do great things. He walked away, leaving her alone in the hall. Emma stood there for a moment, looking at the bone blade in her hand. It was worn now, the edge dulled from use, the surface marked with scratches and nicks. It would need to be resharpened soon. She thought about her grandmother, sitting on the porch of the farmhouse in Nebraska, teaching a 9-year-old girl how to shape bone. She thought about all the hours spent practicing, all the blades made and discarded, all the lessons learned. Her grandmother had known something that Emma was only now beginning to understand. The old skills were not just history. They were the foundation of everything that humans were, everything that made them capable of surviving in a universe that often seemed determined to destroy them. We didn't survive because we were the strongest, her grandmother had said. We survived because we were the most stubborn. Emma smiled and headed toward her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to prove what humans could do. She was ready for all of them,